people are called the effective accelerationists, or EACs for short. And your story opens with a scene at a party where the EACs are putting up banners that say things like, accelerate or die. So I guess my first question is, how worried do I need to be about these people?
So there was this group of people on the internet who are basically like all these effective altruists. They're kind of taking over the conversation. They're getting all this attention. They're raising all these alarms about AI and how it could go rogue and kill us all. And like, we don't believe that. And actually that kind of, we feel like that's a dangerous ideology. And so we're going to start our own ideology that's effectively the opposite of EA. And we're going to call it effective accelerationism. And our platform is basically going to be that we think AI and other technologies should just be allowed to go as fast as possible. And that we are sort of heading toward this glorious utopia of sort of, AI and superhuman, intelligence, and that we should just kind of get out of the way and let it happen.
Got it. So at its root then, EAC is a reaction to effective altruism.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's more the culture and the discussions and the discourse around AI that they object to. They see things like regulators in Washington and Europe being very worried about like these catastrophic risks coming from AI. They see these open letters going around calling for 6-month pauses on AI development. They hear people like, us in the media being worried about AI, and they just think like all these people are blowing this stuff out of proportion. And so that is sort of the idea that they have risen up to promote is like, don't slow this stuff down. Every time you slow this stuff down, you're just delaying the inevitable.
Right. And when you say it like that sounds reasonable. I could see how somebody would think, okay, these doomers are a little out of control. I think we should move faster on some of this stuff. But at the same time, when you look deeply at this subculture, there are some pretty radical ideas in there, right? I was struck in your piece by how many people do not seem like they would be at all bothered if some sort of artificial general intelligence did emerge and actually just overtake human beings, right? Like, talk about kind of that religious aspect of these folks.
Yeah, so it's complicated, right? Because all these groups have sort of bundles of ideas in them, and not everyone subscribes to everything. So like I talked to a bunch of EACs while I was writing this story, and some of them were sort of like, I just kind of like to go to the parties. I like the vibes. These are like fun people to hang out with. They're more optimistic than the effective altruists who are always talking about doomsday scenarios. Some of them were sort of basically just kind of libertarians who think that like capitalism is good and regulation is bad. And in general, the government should stay out of like regulating AI. And some of them have these like very sort of, I would say, dark ideas. The idea of accelerationism itself is actually not a new idea. It has been around for decades, and it was popularized by this philosopher, Nick Land. He basically believed that there were these forces of capitalism and of AI and technology that were going to collide and produce something called the techno-capital singularity. And that would be sort of this point where like technology just runs the world. It overtakes. We can't control it anymore. And, that is an idea that some of the EACs have run with. And so the EACs that I've talked to, they kind of actually agree with the effective altruists that we could have superhuman AGI very soon. They're just not worried about it.
Right.
Some of them think like, well, this is just sort of the natural evolution of things. Like they have this idea of the successor species, which is that like maybe our job as humans is to sort of birth this thing, this form of intelligence that is smarter than us. And if it wipes us out or, subjugates us or, makes us its slave, like maybe that's just kind of the natural order of things, and we shouldn't be too worried about it. I will say that's not something that a lot of EACs believe. I think but that is something that the movement's leaders have actually said.
I am really struck by, you compared this a minute earlier to libertarianism. And I have to say, listening to you describe it, reading your story, it really does feel, at least for some segment of the EAC believers, like this just is rebranded libertarianism. Does that seem like a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, if you sort of dig one level below the memes and kind of the social media of it all, a lot of it is very standard libertarian stuff. And I should say it's also like not a new idea in Silicon Valley. There were all these groups that sort of popped up during the dot-com boom, and even earlier there were these groups like the transhumanists and the extropians. There were sort of all the early internet, kind of the whole Earth catalog era people.
Celebrating the individual, decentralization, and the technologies which they've released on purpose seem to be benevolent ones.
And a lot of those people were kind of techno-libertarians. They believed that like the internet was this, liberating thing, and that the governments should stay away from regulating it. And there was sort of this strain of idealism that basically said like, technology deserves to be free and we should not regulate it. And so to me, EAC is kind of fusing the sort of hardcore libertarian economics of, people like Hayek or Milton Friedman with these kind of Silicon Valley subcultures like the extropians and the transhumanists with like a healthy dose of just sort of like pure rage against the effective altruists.
Yeah. The EACs and the EAs really are two sides of the same coin. And what is notable about that to me is that you do have these growing and relatively powerful contingents that both do agree that AGI is coming and might be here soon. And that just sort of seems worth saying, right? And that for all of the ways that the EACs might want to make fun of the D-cells, they do share a lot of core beliefs.
I think among the most hardcore EACs and some of the leaders, there is this feeling that sort of technology and capitalism are kind of these like inevitable forces that like you can stand in the way or you can get out of the way. But like ultimately, like they are too powerful to be permanently resisted. And so there's just kind of this idea that there are these sort of, these like currents that are just pulling us in the direction of the techno-capital singularity, and that we can delay it, but that ultimately it's inevitable.
So you also write that there are a number of splinter groups that are forming out of EAC, including AAC, BioAC, and DAC. How do they differ? And do I really have to remember all of this?
So, yes, as with any good, religious movement, there are splinter groups. Grimes, also known as Elon Musk's ex, and a musician who has she actually DJ'd the EAC rave that I wrote about in my story. She has proposed something called AAC, which stands for Aligned Accelerationism, which is basically, what if we just accelerated, but like a little more carefully and making sure that the robots actually want us around?
Let's just accelerate the good parts.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. There's also something called BioAC, which is sort of like taking effective accelerationism to the world of biology and like putting chips in our bodies and augmenting ourselves so that we can more effectively, compete and live in a world with lots of super intelligence in it.
Sure.
And then there's DAC, which is Vitalik Buterin, who's the founder of Ethereum, proposed this idea. I think it stands for defensive accelerationism or decentralized accelerationism. He didn't really specify which of those it stands for, but basically it was kind of like a compromise. It was kind of like, what if we accelerated the good parts, but also didn't stop worrying about the potential bad parts?
Got it. Okay, so I'm just going to forget about all of those things immediately, but we congratulate everyone who's coming up.